Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics. Make sure to hit the like button to subscribe if you want more content just like this. Today, we've actually brought on Gold Crown Politics to talk about the 2024 presidential election.
Hey guys, Gold Crown Politics here. On Point, thanks for having me on. Let's take a look at the 2024 election. Let's get it started.
So, what's going on right now, guys, is the most accurate pollster, not only in the United States, not only in 2020 and 2022, but also in other countries like Colombia, Spain, Argentina, Brazil. They've been one of the most accurate pollsters internationally and have a prestigious record, and they just dropped a new national poll, and it is a Trump plus 3.1 percentage point lead, which is just 0.5 percentage points below the last lead they posted for Donald Trump, and this is presumably their final poll. And so with a popular vote victory for Trump of 3 points, it is not looking good for Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris needs to do a lot better than this. Biden won the popular vote last time by 4.5 and actually barely even won the electoral college through Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona. And so this is going to be a big problem for Kamala Harris down the stretch if she is losing by 2 to 3 points, because if that's the case, there is no path. And as of today, I've already projected that Trump is going to win the election. And Gold Crown Politics is also fairly confident that he is as well. I mean, looking at all the breakdowns here, I mean, Trump's getting 44% of Hispanics, 32% of blacks seems a little bit too high. And we see 47% of Asian voters, 55% of white voters. I mean, Donald Trump is improving with every demographic from 2020. He's winning indies by 8 points, independents by 8. He's tied with suburban voters, and he's closing the gap, just a 6 point lead for Harris with urban voters as of right now, which is absolutely insane. And we see that even in the head to head, it's been fairly consistent in the head to head. It hasn't really changed all that much in the head to head matchup. And we even see here, I mean, looking at the head to head, Trump is clearly doing well too. I mean, he's leading with whites by about roughly 11 here. He's down with Hispanics, only a couple points. He's getting a higher black vote share and higher Asian vote share. And he's actually getting 10% of 2020 Joe Biden voters, which is insane. And people who do not vote or didn't remember voting or didn't vote, period, they are breaking for Trump here by a massive margin in this poll. And so right now, it also seems like a plurality of the electorate is going to vote on election day. And what's interesting is that if you look at this, Donald Trump's majority of his supporters from 2020 will actually be voting on election day. Only 28% of Joe Biden voters will be voting on right now. About 28% of them will be voting on election day. And keep in mind, in this poll, Trump's getting about 9% or 10% of Biden 2020 voters. And so if a lot of them are voting, on election day or early voting, that's where you see some of the hemorrhaging of Democrats in some of the early voting numbers. And looking at Biden's approval rating, only 41%. That's not that good for an incumbent. And that's only 2 points higher than what it was in the new Gallup polling that we've gone over extensively on the channel here. And so overall, this is not a good sign for Kamala Harris whatsoever. And now looking at 2020, if you were to shift all of these states by 7.5 points or 7.6, because that's the shift that was mentioned, you would essentially flip all of the swing states plus Minnesota and New Hampshire. Maine and New Mexico would probably still be Democrat, but based on electoral trends, especially with Hispanics, I think New Mexico would be more competitive than about a 2 3 point Harris win. And so, looking at the electoral map, all of the safe states are going to be Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, as well as Nebraska. Nebraska's first, the at large vote, except the second congressional district, Kansas, Oklahoma, Alaska, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, as well as Maine's 2nd Congressional District, California, Hawaii, Maryland, District of Columbia, Massachusetts, Vermont, as well as Maine's 1st Congressional District. Those will all be in the safe Democrat column as of right now. And so I'm going to actually have Gold Crown go ahead and fill out all of these states that are in blank as of right now.
So if we take a look at the state of Washington, this is about a 12.5 point victory for Kamala Harris. Now, this state is very white and college educated, so I would certainly expect the state to continue its leftward historical trend. Oregon, same thing. This is a 10 point win for Kamala Harris. In the state, I would expect it to continue to trend left, has very similar demographics to Washington. And then we can look at the state of Colorado. This is about a 9 point win for Kamala Harris, certainly down from the 13.5 point margin that we saw for Joe Biden in 2020. This state has also been turning very heavily towards Democrats. George Bush, back in 2004, was the last Republican to win the state. And ever since Obama's 2008 landslide election, it's been turning very heavily to the left. And so I would certainly expect to see it continue its Democratic trend. If we look at Illinois, this is about a 9.5 point victory for Kamala Harris in the likely Democratic column. I would certainly expect to see actually improvement in terms of the trend for Republicans in the state, perhaps a little bit. Donald Trump is seeing improvement with African Americans in the state. He's also showing improvement with Arab and Muslim Americans as well. And so that could certainly shift the state to the right a little bit. If we look at New York, this is about a 9 point win for Kamala Harris. Now, this state is very racially diverse. It's also a very union heavy electorate. It has the 2nd highest union electorate in the entire country. And so, that plus the fact that it has a lot of Hispanics, has a lot of African Americans, a decent Asian electorate as well, I would certainly expect to see this state trend very heavily to the right, and it's under a 10 point win this cycle. Now, New Jersey is interesting. This is a 6 point win for Kamala Harris. I'm certainly more bullish on New Jersey than On Point is. He has it at about an 8 point win. I have it at under 5 points, but it averages out to about 6 points. The state has very similar demographics to New York. So I personally, I think that it probably will trend to the right this cycle. Um, Given the demographics within the state, but certainly regardless, it's going to be much more competitive than it was in the last election cycle. We can look up north now to the state of Minnesota. This is about a 1 point lean margin for Kamala Harris in the state. Now, Minnesota is kind of interesting because, it is a fairly deep Democratic state. Obama won the state by about 7, 8 points in 2012, but then it trended pretty heavily to the right in 2016, and we saw it get within about 1.5 points for Hillary Clinton. But in 2020, it zoomed off to the left because Minnesota is very Democratic heavy in terms of that urban blue population center, and so this cycle I would expect it to trend. The state at large will probably continue its trend to the left from 2020. It is very college educated. Tim Walz is also from the state, but I would also expect to see Trump improve with the union electorate in the state. It is pretty heavy in terms of its union presence in terms of the voters there. New Hampshire, now this state is a tilt margin for Kamala Harris at just about a 0.5 point. We actually both have New Hampshire as a tilt margin. This state, it's very white and college educated. It is a little hard to predict because the independents within the state are a little volatile in terms of their voting patterns. They're unpredictable. But I think that regardless, given an R+3 national environment, I would expect the state to be very competitive, probably very similar to the 2016 margin that we saw with Hillary Clinton just barely edging out in the state. Maine, we're looking at about a 2 point victory for Kamala Harris in the state. Now, this one is very similar to New Hampshire. It's a little unpredictable. It's very white and college educated. So I'd expect Harris to hold on to the state, but not by a very large margin. And so it's going to be very competitive. Now, New Mexico, we're looking at a 2 point win in the state. We have both of our forecasts are pretty close. He has it at about 1 point. I have it at about 2 points. Very competitive. Nonetheless, I do think that Trump will see improvements with Hispanics in the state. It's also a border state, and so that will push it to the right, perhaps a little bit. And then we can look at the state of Virginia. This is about a 3.5 point victory for Kamala Harris. This state, it is kind of interesting because the racial demographics within the state would probably predict about a neutral trend. I think Glenn Youngkin being a very popular governor in the state, I think that could certainly help Republicans as well, especially with the paper ballot initiative that was passed. That will probably clean up a lot of the shenanigans that could potentially be going on in the state. And then we can look at the state of, let me see here. We can look at Texas. This is about a 14-point win for Donald Trump in this state. Now, Texas being a border state, I would expect it to probably trend a little bit to the right. Democrats are going to improve in the major urban blue population centers like Dallas and Austin and San Antonio. But I do feel that the border counties will more or less counteract that leftward push in those big blue cities, as well as Hispanics. I do think that Trump will improve majorly with Hispanics in the state, as well as in Florida, which is a 13-point likely Republican margin for Trump. This state has been zooming off to the right. We saw what happened in the midterms with DeSantis. Hispanics really pushed that state heavy, hard to the right. And I would expect to see the state be probably at least close to that 15-point safe margin for Trump. And then we can look at Iowa and Ohio. These are both safe margins for Donald Trump this election cycle. The white working class, they trended pretty hard to the right back in 2020. So both those states trended to the right. And I would expect to see them both in the safe column in an R+3 national environment. And then we can finish this election forecast out with the swing states as well as Nebraska's second congressional district, which is about a 1.7-point Kamala Harris victory within Nebraska's second congressional district. This district was, it was redrawn as a more Republican district. However, it has been trending very heavily to the left, and so I think that Kamala Harris will probably hang on to that district. I don't think that Trump has enough to flip it from 2020, but it's still pretty competitive. And then we can start with the Rust Belt swing states. So let's go with these. So Wisconsin is a 7-point victory for Donald Trump. If we look at Michigan, that's just under a 5-point lean victory for Donald Trump. And Pennsylvania is about 6 points for Donald Trump. Now, the Rust Belt as a whole, those three Rust Belt swing states, they typically vote with each other. Historically, they have voted with each other the past 8 straight election cycles since 1992. And I would expect to see the same thing in this election cycle. The Rust Belt has a decent union electorate in all 3 of those states, particularly in Michigan. And you also have a decent amount of African Americans in Michigan as well. I would expect that to mean that Trump would improve in the state. It could potentially go into the likely column. We'll have to see. But I definitely think that, as a whole, the Rust Belt will be fairly easy for Donald Trump to win in this election cycle. And looking down to the Sun Belt swing states, North Carolina, we're looking at a 7.5-point likely victory for Donald Trump in the state. Georgia is about 5.5 points for Donald Trump. Arizona is about a 7-point victory, and Nevada is about a 6-point margin of victory for Donald Trump within the state. Now, I definitely think that, even though Harris is performing better with younger voters, she's also performing in states that are more college educated. And so, that could potentially push some states like Georgia and Arizona to the left. But, Trump's improvement with Hispanics will certainly help him in those southwestern Sun Belt states like Arizona and Nevada. And I think that Trump's improvements with African Americans will certainly help him in places like Georgia and North Carolina in the Sun Belt. And so, it's looking really good for Donald Trump right now on this map. You can clearly see that he has a decisive advantage, like we saw with Atlas. All the other key indicators as well from 2020 are showing that he's about up by 3 points nationally. And so this is a pretty stellar victory for the former president. Now, it's not quite a landslide margin, but it's looking like a pretty big win. It would eclipse his 2016 election win where he won 306 electoral college votes. And a Republican hasn't even won the popular vote since back, Bush Jr. back in 2004. So that would be a pretty big achievement for him. And this would be a pretty decisive victory for the former president.
All right, guys, and that concludes our combined forecast as of right now. We will definitely be doing more of these as the election comes up, and we'll definitely be collaborating more. I believe Gold Crown Politics is planning on releasing his final map on November 1st, so make sure to go ahead and subscribe to him for that. And make sure to go ahead and keep paying attention to me as well, as I will be releasing my final forecast on the morning of November 5th. And when we go to Bet Online, guys, make sure to check them out in the description down below. As we can see right here, they got all the betting odds for the winner of the election, the way the states are going to go, who wins the House of Representatives, as well as the US Senate election. So make sure to go ahead, check them out. Follow me on X in the description down below, and we will see you guys very, very soon.